Hi, welcome to Angel's Nook. We're trying a different video format for you guys this time, and we're hoping it will kind of balance out for all of our viewers. We're going to be doing a short and long hybrid. So those of you that like a quick reel and you want to move on, the first part of this video is for you. Those of you who come here to really learn the techniques, to figure out exactly how we were able to create the crackle finish in this in specific spots, how to get an even finish with the stains, all the different things that we do here, how to do repairs, how to make sure that all of your handles are perfectly lined up on something like this. Stick around. Our normal format is still here in this video. It's just past the short one for those of you who like to just have a quick, fast look at what was done. Thanks for joining us. I picked this cabinet up off of Marketplace thinking it was going to be the right depth and the right size to organize sewing supplies, because I've always wanted a cabinet where I can put basically everything in one spot. This turned out to not be it, because the drawers don't go the entire depth. It's definitely a primitive piece, and when I picked it up, a lot more primitive than I expected. The finish is not as bad as it looks, but it's pretty bad. So first of all, we're going to have to figure out where the drawers actually go in this thing and label them so that they go back and fit, because it's one spot only fit for them. It was handmade at some point. I have no idea the age of it. The lady that I bought it from said she remembered being a little girl and being at an antique store with her grandmother, and her grandmother bought it and had it for the rest of her life, and then it came to the woman. This turned out to be a whole lot more work than either of us intended. Now, all the drawers fit exactly. Now that we've completely finished it, which you'll see in the video how we did that, none of the drawers are wonky. They are perfectly square. They've got line in the bottom, and put a label on the back for how these drawers go in and how they are numbered, because I personally hate when you have drawers that are numbered but you have no idea how people are going about numbering it. So in the process of doing this, the entire thing had to be completely broken apart. Everything had to be recut. And this is actually about 2.5 inches shorter than it started out. It's got new legs. And putting this crackle finish exactly where I wanted it on this, I really love what it did, because it's given me what I wanted, a cottage core look that can also go with any decor. And as always in these videos, use the chapters, use the scroll bar to get to where you need to either review something you want to know how to do, or you just want to move on because it's a step you want to do. This was 2 coats of linen over that dark finish and over repairs that had to be done on the sides and all of this. So hopefully this will be a project that you'll think about replicating for yourself, either using the crackle finish or how to get the stain and have an even finish on it rather than getting a stripy look that can happen with stain. It's all in here for you. So let's get going on it. All of these drawers have been sanded down to bare wood. They've been filled, and the surface has been sanded so that it's just down to those fill spots, having any fill still showing. You don't want globs of the wood putty or even a thin strands of it over something, especially if you're going to be sealing it, or I'm sorry, staining it. I don't have to shellac these repairs because I'm using an oil-based stain over it. If I was using water-based to paint this, I would have to shellac this with a spray shellac first, or these are going, any place there's a repair, it's going to look like a dull spot underneath the paint, and it will keep showing up as an odd looking spot no matter how many coats of paint you put on it. But with the oil base, I don't need to do that. The outside of this box, I'm just going to polyurethane. So I only want to stain the very front of the door, the edges, and the top here. I want very little stain on this. I'm using Provincial, but I don't want a heavy coating of the stain. So I have diluted it 1-to-1 with mineral spirits, so it's much thinner, and that's what I'm going to wipe on here, and then wipe off the excess with a paper towel. I basically want to give it a little bit of color and blend out the unevenness. That's actually what stain has been used for centuries, is to even out the unevenness for how wood can take color in its raw state. And I could sand and sand and sand and still have these discolorations in this. It has to do with the sap of the wood. It has to do with the age of the wood. That's just not going to go away. And I really didn't want to bleach this. And even bleaching this, I wasn't going to get a lot better here. With water or clear coat, the wood goes dark. It's just simply, which you can see on the inside where I have put the clear coat already. It simply does that. That's what this wood's color is going to be. So if I just had clear coat on this, this would go dark, but it would show this unevenness. I'll still see some of the unevenness with the Provincial, but it won't be as easy to see. This was with the Provincial without any thinning to it. You can't see the grain as much as you can see in this one. And that little bit of difference there where the repairs are, I'll work a little bit with that with some dry brushing before I put clear coat on it, but then it will also, the clear coat will actually even all of that out. Actually, I may not even need to do the dry brushing. See how that dries? Yep, it's still going to need a little bit, but I covered up some of the other that was there. That spot. that's what's going to happen to the rest of these drawers. The stain has done a lot to even out the light and dark on this, and it's almost exactly the same color as if it's a little bit lighter than if I had just done the straight HTP gel stain. So you're probably going, well then why did you bother to dilute it? Because on raw wood you want the oil of the stain to penetrate into the wood to give it some moisture. It's going to help the finish long run, but it's more important that it's going to help that wood not dry out, warp, crack, because it needs that to fully seal it. A topical stain just sits on top. It doesn't penetrate down in. So by diluting it with the mineral spirits, I have allowed it to soak in like a penetrating stain. Now, I also have used less than half of what I mixed up, and I mixed up 2 teaspoons of stain with 2 teaspoons of mineral spirits to do all of this. And I used 1 paper towel, a good paper towel. This one happens to be Bounty. A cheap paper towel could stick to this and tear off, but there is not a blot of paper, paper towel, anything on any of these. And by the time I finished doing all of the drawers and wiping them down, and you saw how long one took, it was ready for me to start doing this, because with my bare fingers, I could rub my fingers over it and it felt totally dry. It wasn't dry, but it felt dry. I'm using one of my oldest angled 1/2-inch brushes, because the brush bristles are all splayed, because it works really great for dry brushing or doing what I'm about to do on this to show you how to help blend this in. I've already worked on these 2 drawers. You also might be questioning, why on earth did I fill the holes on this if I'm going to put handles back on these drawers? And I'm putting the same handles back on. These were not put on level and straight to start with, and in recovering the drawer fronts and being able to reuse them and size them to a uniform size, that moved. If I put the handles back in the original holes, they'd be wonky both in height and in angle. So that's why that had to be done on this. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how to use a brush like this to help even out stain. There's stain all over this brush, but it's from me doing this, and it's actually a little bit stiff now because a little bit of the stain has dried on it. I barely want to touch the stain that I have down in here, and that's way too much to have on my brush, so you can see me pouncing it out till I get to this point. Then on these areas like this where it's a little bit lighter, I'm going to take the brush and lightly go over it. That area right there is a little bit lighter, so is that. There is so little on my brush that I'm not creating a stripe. I'm just creating some striations to hide that light spot. The bottom of this paper plate is not sealed like the top part, so I can't go back and get much off my plate for working on this. On this one, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. Those were not showing so badly. These are. So I want to get into them, give them a little bit more. And then it's the same thing. And those are going to require a little bit of touch up with a tiny art brush to bring them out. But this is the first step I'm going to do on all these drawers to even them out. These boxes of the drawers I'm putting polyurethane on to seal the outside because all the pieces were sanded down to raw wood. The new pieces of wood were raw wood, so that will slow down any possible warpage in future years with this. I wanted you to see the finish and that I was able to just continue as I finished drawers. I went back and lightly continued with my brush to dry brush across to blend out the fills of those holes. It didn't require me to use a small art brush. I just continued doing what I had shown you earlier. I had taped these because I did not want stain on the sides of the door. I wanted a very clear, clean finish. And of course the tape won't come off my fingers now that I'm trying to do this on camera. One of the things that's helpful with these foam brushes, or a good bristle brush too, but I just like the fact that it's a good smooth finish with foam, is since I don't know if I'm putting polyurethane on this yet, I don't want to get any on here as I do these boxes. So I'm going to bring my brush down, fill that in, and then add more poly to the brush, but I am not putting on a thick coat. I am not dunking this way down in the poly. You don't ever want to do that because you're just going to wind up with areas that have runs or laps even with a foam brush. The color this is turning with the poly would have gone exactly the same way with water, with polyacrylic. It is the wood. That's why if you're going to stain wood, you wet it with acetone or mineral spirits to figure out what color stain you want to use to get the actual color that you want. You can also see when I showed you that board that thinning the Provincial did not change its color. It came out the same color as if I had used it as a topical. That's one of the places you definitely don't want your foam brush to be heavy. I will get the back of these drawers with poly on it, but while I'm working on this, I want to make sure I have places I can touch, that I do not smear any of the finish. Just saw a spot right there that I missed. Make sure you're in good light. It makes a huge difference. So I have one more drawer to do, and I will decide once the other is dry whether I'm going to polyurethane the front of these or I'm going to leave them matte. Now that the finish has dried on here, I've made the decision that this is what I want for the front of the drawers to look like. This is how the stain will look over raw wood with no additional finish. You can leave it like this in the matte form. This sheen is actually the sheen that the stain gives if you're applying it over a previous finish. It will have this low sheen like this, the satin sheen. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it on the front and the back of the boxes now that the sides have dried to where I can handle them. And I'm going to put permanent labels on the back of the drawers to denote where they actually sit in the cabinet. After all the work that had to go into getting the drawers squared back up, I abandoned my plan of leaving this completely primitive. So there's been a lot of fill, there's been a lot of work on it, and then that has been sprayed with a coat of spray shellac so that none of these knots will bleed out, and it's also been deglossed off camera. But I wanted you to see how well the paint can cover with brush and roll. I'm just going to show you the side here to let you see what it should look like when you're applying the paint over something like this, and especially a white, which a lot of times people wind up applying the paint so that it looks thinned out in places like this does, which is actually some fill that got in while it was being sanded and worked on. The inside pieces, to make it easier for myself, I already put 2 coats on those, knowing I was going to have to repair them because we were using clamps, we were using boards on fresh paint. But it was at least going to give me a base that was easier to work with. And I have this up on boards so that I can get to all of the edges without having it stick down to boards.
So why use that brush instead of regular brush?
This brush grabs exactly enough on the ends to give you really good coverage with this paint. A flatter brush will not pick up the same amount of paint, and what this is made out of, the Syntec bristles, don't create a bunch of thin lines from the paint.
Looks like you're rolling hard.
I'm not putting pressure on this. I am rolling enough to blend out those. When you get a spot like this, immediately roll the other way. the gray roller will show more white paint on it than it will other colors, simply because of the sharp contrast. Last roll along this front edge, so when I come back to finish the front edge, when I'm ready for that, but that is what a first coat of white should look like on this. Don't go back and add more paint over these areas right now. Don't keep rolling over it, but look at it to see there's no bubbles on it. If there's bubbles, barely touch to just hit the surface of those and pop them. But that's what I'm going to do to finish out the rest of this cabinet. Because this is a white, this is linen, I have let it dry 3 hours after its first coat. I also washed my brush and washed my roller. If this had been a darker color, this close to putting another coat on, I would have wrapped the brush in a double layer of saran wrap and then used it. But I absolutely wash the rollers between coats. If you don't, you're going to risk getting a lot of texture. Even if you're rolling properly, the dry paint on the brush is on the roller is going to mess things up, because some of it's going to be dry whether you think it is or not. And especially on the edges, which can make lines. So you can see there's some light and dark here, but it's not major. It's not got big areas of thin and big areas of thick. And that is key to getting good coverage with this paint. The first coat I showed you, I went the whole length. This coat, I'm going to show you how to work in smaller sections. I keep dipping because I'm not dipping way down in my brush. I'm picking up just enough to get a good coat of paint on here. Without trying to dry it out. I'm going across the brush strokes just enough that I can see that those brush strokes are blending in and losing their depth. Rolling this edge up here, but I'll still have to paint its second coat, but I don't want lap marks on the front of that. So now I'm not going to go way back into there. My paint is stopping here. I'm just meeting it. I can see here where my brush strokes stopped. You don't want to take forever putting the paint on. bit of paint on my brush. I'm going to go ahead and put the coat up here on the front edge of this. I went inside there. Make sure I was catching any runs. Turning the roller, my glove's trying to come off. When I get down here, I can still see there. Now, I'm not rolling back over into where I started. I will get that edge because sometimes it's in there. And 2 coats are going to cover this. That's what I'm going to do going around the rest of this to finish it. When you put polyurethane over something, the first coat when it's dried, and if you're putting multiple coats you'll feel it in between, has just the tiniest little bumps on it sometimes. Some people think that that's just a bunch of dust that got on there, but even in a really what's called a clean room for spraying, you will get those on a finish. And so these entire boxes, the outside and the front, have been lightly sanded with 800 grit by hand to knock all of that off. And now this is literally just glass smooth, and you can actually see the low satin sheen that it has on it. So what we're about to do now is start putting the pieces on here, the handle and the label brackets, to make it look more like an apothecary cabinet. And I swear we need to at some point do a video on 10,000 uses for old faux wood blinds, because it's remarkable how many things you can do with this. So 2 of them have been glued together with a seam here. They've also been taped to keep them good and tight. And Jim has cut out a template so that every single one of these are going to be lined up level and straight and centered on any of these drawers as we put them together, because that can be a real nightmare to get them all in the same place when you're looking at drawers that are parallel to each other. You want them to be exactly in the same place. And there's a little bit of wonkiness to each of these drawers, even though they have been redone. So we're going to be putting the template on here. I'm going to turn it around here because Jim's going to be working down here. And they fit really, really tight. I did decide to clean up the handles with 50-50 vinegar and water, boiled them for 15 minutes, and then scrubbed them with Barkeeper's Friend. These pieces I purchased off of Amazon, and they had heavy dark antiquing on them. So I took the Barkeeper's Friend and scrubbed all of that off, leaving just enough for these to blend with the look as though they'd always been together. And they have been sprayed with 1 coat of satin clear coat to make sure that these don't start tarnishing again, because brass without anything on it will immediately start turning, and I want to keep this look to them to keep it permanent on here. So these snap into this. They're really tight. They're not going to wiggle anywhere. And then with them on the bottom of the box and the side of the box is lined up square, they're ready for Jim to drill holes and put the screws into these.
Talk about it.
The tape that's on here is to make sure we don't go deeper. It's a marker for the drill bit. And also, don't get a drill bit that is exactly the same size as your screw. You want it smaller than your screws, because if you don't, if you make it the same size, your screws won't hold. They'll just strip out. You need it smaller so that the screw can go in, but so it also will get a good tight grip on it. Teeny tinies.
I didn't know. I was just checking on you, see if you're paying attention.
That's why 2 hands are better than 1. 2 sets of hands, rather. And they'll go in farther than that.
Voila.
You can see they are tight. So now it's perfectly square, perfectly lined up. And we actually need to tighten in the top handles a little bit tighter, but you can see where they are. I've also put on the back of all of these, they're all numbered. And the top drawer, number 1, I actually put a diagram showing how the drawers number top to bottom, because when you have a cabinet like this that the drawers have to fit in specific orders, they can be numbered with marker, whatever, but if you don't know the order in which they went, did they go 1 to 5, 6 to 10, did they go 1, 2, 3, 4 going up from the bottom, it's just nice to have a diagram like that on the back. And I'll try to get a picture of that we can pop in here on the video itself. I forgot to tell you that I painted 1 coat of paint on these feet before they were put on here, because I absolutely despise painting the feet of furniture, especially when it's upright. I realized this was small enough that I could lay the cabinet flat and make it easier. But when this is upright on the floor, it's really hard to get into the back, and you can miss pieces of it, and then you get at the right angle of the piece of furniture and you see the leg is a mess. So 1 coat fully on there with a really good coat over those raw wood feet allows me that if I do have a miss back in here, it's not going to show in the shadows. So it just makes painting it easier when it's upright. What I'm going to be doing right now is applying a color that's now retired. It's called Boots, but I happen to have it. It's a rich caramely brown. I want to put some crackling on this. HTP does not like to create a crackle finish in the traditional ways. So what I discovered while I was working on another project was that hide glue can be used to create a crackle finish, and you have a lot more control over it than you do the traditional Elmer's glue. So I did some experimenting, and if you really want to see the steps for how I figured out this process, then you can go later in the video where it will show you how we experimented with HTP and hide glue to figure out how to get this crackling effect, because I don't want it over the whole finish. I want it to just be an aged effect on this, where that you see an old piece where not the whole thing isn't crackled, but just spaces of it are. And in order for crackling to show up, for the lines to show up, you have to have a darker color under a lighter color for it to show through when it cracks, or the crackling really isn't very visible. So I have all my coats of paint on this cabinet, the frame, and I even painted the back so that this could be set wherever you wanted to. So now I'm going to be adding the brown. This is the first step, and let it dry for where I want the crackling effect to wind up on this. And I'm using a rather worn brush. And I will probably go back as I finish this and have another layer depending on how this goes. So I need a decent amount of coverage to create the effect I want. It doesn't matter that this is kind of sloppy, but you don't want it to be real groovy yet. So I am smoothing this with the brush. I don't want a lot of brush stroke in this right now. I will be putting some on the top of the cabinet too, but this right now is easier for me to see what I want it to do. I don't want an exact pattern, I want randomness, because that's what happens with crackling. It doesn't go over the entire thing. We're going to move the cameras and I'm going to put some onto the sides. The strokes that I'm using right now will make more sense when I do the next step to this. And I'm going to keep working around this. We're going to lift this down and I will do the top. And you will see those sections when I do the next step. You'll see where they went. We experimented a lot with the hide glue after I discovered that it was one of the ways that gave you more control with crackling. HTP paint is very flexible and does not like to split or crack at all. So it was kind of figuring out steps to make it work, to get a crackle effect, which is not exactly the way you see it on videos with hide glue, because regular paint will crackle really fast. But we found that these are the steps that we needed to do. We're going to put a thin layer of the hide glue on here. I'm using a chip brush. You don't want to use a regular brush. You want striations. And it wants to bead up on HTP. So you have to keep stroking it lightly to keep it, literally you want some paintbrush marks in it. But you don't want it super thick and heavy on here. And then it's heated till you can touch it, but it's not still wet, but it might be slightly tacky. Then I'm going to apply the paint over it, the linen over this. I know this looks like a spotted cow right now, but it's going to totally change when we do these steps to it. So we're going to start on it and let you see the magic as it happens on this. And you want to get a little bit past where your paint is, where your paint marks are, so that it blends out just like a regular aging of crackling would actually do. You need to have a good light so you can see that what you're doing is covering all of the space that you want the crackle to be in. Watch for the bristles. And Jim's gonna be blowing heat across it, which you won't be able to see, so that we can let you see the effect of what's gonna happen with this when we put the paint on it. And I'm going to be watching to make sure that the paint's not totally pooling up. labeled for which piece they are, which side is up, because we don't know which of these pieces we're going to be able to salvage when we try to square this all up with the cuts, the new cuts on it. So right now they're just being kept in sets, and we've got other pieces that the drawer fronts and all have to be glued before any assembly can be done. And you can see other bundles up there. As can often happen when you start to do repairs or you start to level out, square up items that were old, and especially a piece like this, it appears to have been made from scraps of lumber and hand planed because it's not even planing on it. So we wound up to get the drawers all squared up, the right shape and all. It had to be completely dismantled, and Jim has completely reworked all of the drawers so that they're uniform size. And while it was apart, since that is an easier time to do it, all of the inside of the cabinet and the box has been sprayed with shellac to seal it. And then along where the front edge, this would be the front, of the sides of the cabinet are, I have put a 2-inch strip of the color that I'm going to be painting the outside of the box. It's just going to leave a nice even strip of paint, so if the drawers are pulled out, the inside still looks nice too, because this back here doesn't need to be stained. It's going to be in shadow in the inside of it. But we also did that to the new shelving supports that had to come up in it. And it's just a piece after piece of figuring out how to put this together, make it work, and make it square up so it's something that's going to look nice and hold up for a long period of time. And when the drawers are pulled in and out, they'll go smoothly and everything will fit appropriately. We also, in one of the photos you'll see, we also put, the top was warped. So Jim sprayed the top of it after it was all sanded down and put weights on it, left it overnight, clamped and weighted so that now it is level and ready to sit properly on the top of the cabinet. Those are just things that you can wind up happening, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, but now instead of these crooked, wonky pieces in this, it's going to be a nice sturdy piece to be used for years to come. In order to make sure a drawer is square and not in the mess that these originally were, Jim has put a board this way and this way that have been squared up with an L square, and we know they're exactly 90 degrees. They're attached to this. They're not going to come off with the two-sided carpet tape or carpenter's tape. It just depends on what it's called in your area. These drawers all had to be taken completely apart. So to make life simpler for myself, to finish these, I wanted liner on the bottom piece, so that is on there. And then each one of these pieces is labeled with a piece of tape, because I also went ahead, finished with polyurethane on the inside. This is the color this wood naturally wants to go. It's not the polyurethane. Even though it looks a lot lighter here, as soon as you get it wet with water, mineral spirits, the polyurethane, this is what it looks like. But this, by finishing the inside and then doing a light sand, because you can feel nibs on the first coat of polyurethane, this allows it to be put together. And each of these pieces are numbered. This is always the upper left for us. So we knew this is how the drawer front actually sits to be in its upright position. Again, tape on the outside to remind you where you're at. And each of the back were labeled as well, so we know exactly which way they go. And then a piece of tape on the outside numbering the drawer that we know its position. So once we have it here and into the box, then clamping has to be done to further square this up, and then in sections it will get glued together and then nailed with a brad nailer so that all of this will stay together. The drawers, none of them are exactly perfect because we tried to save as much of the wood as we could. We couldn't save the back panel or the bottom panel, but everything else we saved. But they're different thicknesses, so there was a lot of work that had to go to just to get them to pretty close to a uniform size. And we're going to show you the rest of the steps of what we did to get this glued so it stays completely square, so it will slide in and out properly out of the cabinet.
What are we doing?
The jig for marking your handles and pulls on cabinets also works when you take it apart to make sure that your spacing inside of something is exactly the same. So that has been put there, and then by putting it down here, it wedges so that when we glue the back and this piece together, it's going to be exactly the same width here and here, without having to cut blocks of wood, because each one of these drawers are literally slightly different size. Because there was only so much that could be cut down and still fit in the cabinet. The clamps are being put against the boards that are down with double-sided carpenter tape, because that gives you a good strong wedge to square this up against the square bars that were in the jig.
Good.
So now that we know it's square in there, this one is going to come off so that I can take this off and put the glue on it. a good glue doesn't require that you put a huge amount on there. And we have a container to keep that glue upside down so we can easily squeeze out the glue. Now it's back to popping that back together with the clamp. And the back.
We'll wipe some glue over here to squish it out.
Save yourself headache and immediately wipe off the excess glue with a wet paper towel. And using the brad nailer to put these together. Go into the inside to get that glue out again. And the best place where these have these corner miters in here, the best place to put your glue is in the valley. One on top. It is impossible to get a box squared up without using clamps as you're working through the nailing process and the gluing. Remove the tape on the outside that reminded us of what part was the outside of the wood. And check the inside of this one for glue. And also wax paper is underneath here because glue will seep and you don't want glue all over for the box to adhere down to whatever you have it sitting on. Once your basic nails have been put in place, then it's finishing up nailing all the other places. And if needed, clamping before you nail to make sure that the boards are pulled tight against your surfaces. We're happy to say the last drawer is assembled. This is especially a banner moment in this piece of furniture for Jim, with all the hours he's put into trying to bring these drawers into a squared formation so that we've got at least to this point now. The next thing is we've got to fill all of these holes because the handles have to be moved to a different spot, and some of the drawer fronts had to be cut in such a way that those holes are just really not going to work. This board has warpage in it that is for the base, so if it's warped, it's going to make the whole cabinet cattywampus and wobble, even with the legs on it. So in order to fix that, when you have sanded wood down to its raw state, it does not work on a finish. But when the wood is sanded down to raw wood, it's hard to see on the camera, but this has a rainbow curve in it that's enough to mess up this board. So when you have that, you want to wet the side of the board, that if you think about a bowl, wherever the curve is, the inside curve is the part of the board you want to wet. So that's what we have done with this. We have sprayed it with water, and now, get that to lay down. Now when we lay it down and we clamp it flat with weight on it to let it dry, this board will become completely level. At some point in time, the two sides of the board had different moisture that got to them, which is what caused the warpage. So by adding water to that part of the curve that would be the inside, you are going to flatten it. If we had wet this side, it would make that bow much worse. So that's how you go about getting these flat. And at the same time right now, before we've attached these, I'm actually taking the time to hand sand off the permanent marker that's on there, because it will bleed through the white paint that I'm going to be using on this cabinet. So there you go. You got it on?
Mm-hmm.
Figuring out exactly where the center of new legs are that haven't got a center marking on it without doing your X's and figuring out your center and then drilling. You still can't see straight down to your board for where that might be. So one of the things that you can do is figure out a spacer that works for you. And in this case, I had looked at this right side up with the whole shelf on it to see where I liked the legs. And this particular board gave me, if I line it up against the edge, when I tap the leg against it, it's hitting the fattest part of the leg and keeping it in a uniform space. And then when I do the same thing on the other side, they are exactly where I want them to be. But I double check them before I mark them. And I'm holding my thumb flush against the edge of this and the side of this board so that I have this where I want it. And now I can hold that down. And actually, I want a marker for this so that I can see better where it is for putting it back on there, because a pencil is going to be hard to see. So now I can put glue on here, glue this down in place, and from the top side put, once this is dry from the top side, add brads of nails straight through to give these extra support. And I'm going to do that with all of the legs on this. We're going to be mixing a 2-part JV Weld Quick for adhering these feet to this. We won't be clamping it because it can tend to shift while it's drying. But once it dries, it is extremely hard. It actually has some metal in it, which really binds the two surfaces together, and will also put a couple of brads through from the other side once these have dried. But it's a 1-to-1 mix of this, mixing it up and then placing these in place.
Cool.
These boxes of the drawers, I'm putting polyurethane on to seal the outside because all the pieces were sanded down to raw wood. The new pieces of wood were raw wood, so that will slow down any possible warpage in future years with this. I wanted you to see the finish and that I was able to just continue as I finished drawers. I went back and lightly continued with my brush to dry brush across to blend out the fills of those holes. It didn't require me to use a small art brush. I just continued doing what I had shown you earlier. Right now I'm trying to decide whether I want to put a coat of polyurethane on the front of these or if I want to leave them matte. Because this is over raw wood, the stain, whether you thin it or you don't, goes very matte. You can see this board was not sanded. It had the original finish on it. It went very matte. I have put polyurethane on this side. It's not dry yet, so it looks really shiny. It won't be shiny when it's dry. I'm trying to decide which I want. The polyurethane, the little bit of sheen that it will have, and the light reflection will cause you to be able to see the grain much clearer. If you leave it matte, you do not see the grain as clearly. So it's simply a matter of personal choice. These drawers don't need a top coat. They are fully sealed right now. Even though I thinned the stain, it's still got enough protection on it. It wouldn't be enough for like the top of a dining room table with it thinned. It would need to be coated to give that protection. But for everyday use, for a cabinet like this, a nightstand, whatever, this is absolutely fine. An end table, it's fine. So that's where I am with this right now, is letting this dry to see what I think I want with it, and to let you see how these are. I had taped these because I did not want stain on the sides of the door. I wanted a very clear, clean finish. And of course the tape won't come off my fingers now that I'm trying to do this on camera. One of the things that's helpful with these foam brushes, or a good bristle brush too, but I just like the fact that it's a good smooth finish with foam, is since I don't know if I'm putting polyurethane on this yet, I don't want to get any on here as I do these boxes. So I'm going to bring my brush down, fill that in, and then add more poly to the brush, but I am not putting on a thick coat. I am not dunking this way down in the poly. You don't ever want to do that, because you're just going to wind up with areas that have runs or laps, even with a foam brush. The color this is turning with the poly would have gone exactly the same way with water, with polyacrylic. It is the wood. That's why if you're going to stain wood, you wet it with acetone or mineral spirits to figure out what color stain you want to use to get the actual color that you want. You can also see when I showed you that board that thinning the Provincial did not change its color. It came out the same color as if I had used it as a topical. That's one of the places you definitely don't want your foam brush to be heavy. I will get the back of these drawers with poly on it, but while I'm working on this, I want to make sure I have places I can touch, that I do not smear any of the finish. Just saw a spot right there that I missed. Make sure you're in good light. It makes a huge difference. So I have one more drawer to do, and I will decide once the other is dry whether I'm going to polyurethane the front of these or I'm going to leave them matte.